capacity. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. These sessions are designed to help young people across the Caribbean build knowledge, develop practical skills, and engage in meaningful discussions about biodiversity conservation. Today's topic is wildlife photography, exploring nature through the lens. Everybody has experienced some level of photography, whether it be an animal that you've seen in a picture or these beautiful sceneries. But today we'll learn that wildlife photography is much more than taking beautiful pictures. It helps to document biodiversity, tell conservation stories, raise awareness about threatened ecosystems, and inspire people to protect nature. Before we begin, I would like to make some quick housekeeping announcements. Please be mindful of your microphones. We'll ask you to keep them muted. And if you have any questions throughout the duration of this session, you can put them in the chat and we will have a designated discussion section to address them all. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Mr. John Griffith. Mr. Griffith has extensive experience documenting wildlife and natural ecosystems through photography. His work highlights how photography can be a powerful tool for conservation, education, and storytelling. Today, he'll be sharing his journey into wildlife photography, practical tips for beginners, ethical considerations when photographing wildlife, and the role photography can play in biodiversity conservation. Please join me in giving Mr. Griffith a warm welcome. Mr. Griffith, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, good evening, everybody. Happy to be here, happy to have everybody here. And I hope that this presentation can, inspire other people to start. And I hope I can help other photographers starting out with some tips and tricks and, just give you my journey throughout the 3 years that I've been doing wildlife photography. So let me see if I can share my screen. Right. So a little bit about me. My name is John Griffith. I am 24 years old. I'm a wildlife photographer, as you know, and I'm also a marine wildlife and conservation biologist. And I am from the island of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martin. I started wildlife photography about 3 years ago, and I can say that I'm definitely in it for the long run. I have always been into photography. I would say probably since secondary school, I guess, but different type, I didn't have a camera back then, but I had a phone, and I would always, beg my parents to get me the latest of something with a good camera, because I would always want to take pictures of people, sunsets, the ocean, waves breaking, that sort of thing. And that's where it started. To the dismay of my wallet, I don't think I'd ever put down a camera. So I have a lot of money to spend in the future. But yes, I got into wildlife photography about 3 years ago, so 2023. I was doing an internship, and before that, my parents decided they wanted to do something, special for my birthday. So I had a decision to make, and for some reason, I decided I was going to ask for a camera. And that's where it started. I got my first camera, which is a Canon Rebel T7, and it came with 2 lenses, a kit lens and a 75 to 300 millimeter lens. Wasn't the best, but I loved it for what it was, and I was always outside shooting. From there, I I would have gotten better gear, from supportive parents, saving some money up, and supportive family members. And through that kind of, boost in my gear, I was able to take better pictures, as well as I learned the basics on my T7. So I was able to use the better gear to its fullest advantage. And in 2024, I entered one of the biggest wildlife photography competition in the world. And while I didn't place, I didn't win anything. What I take away from that was the fact that a young man from Grenada was able to beat out at least 50,000 other entries from some of the best photographers in the world. And I was in the final round of judging. In fact, this is the image here that would have gotten me that far. Very proud of this image. But yeah, so after that, in 2025, I would have entered the Caribbean Wildlife Photo Contest. The Caribbean is an organization based in, I think, Martinique. Excuse me. And they decided, let me enter, see what I could do. And I was given a highly commended, not prize, but one of my photos was highly commended. And then after that, I entered the EPIC Environmental Protection in the Caribbean. They had a photo contest called Seas and Scenes, and I won the Caribbean Choice Best Snapshot Award for that competition, which I'm quite happy about, very proud. So let's us get into understanding wildlife photography. What does it entail, right? So to me, wildlife photography, as I would describe it, is the art of photographing wild moments, freezing your experience in a way that can be shared with others and also inspires others. This means you have to actively go out and look for those moments. And it doesn't even have to be far. Based on where you live, you could just go out and find the beauty around your house, your neighborhood. You don't have to go to the most remote or even the most exotic locations. For reference, the photo that I have right here, this was taken probably, let's say, 10 minutes walk from my house. This was taken after a phone call, actually. One of my friends called me to identify a bird and stayed there I drove down and we stayed there for about 2 hours, and I was just photographing, and I was able to capture this marlin stretching its tail feathers. So that's a wonderful shot. And, unlike other types of photography, wildlife photography, it forces you to slow down. You can't run and gun. You have to slow down and observe, because I'm not gonna lie, before I got into birds and wildlife photography, I didn't notice the amount of animals or wildlife Grenada had until I picked up the camera and I was forced to start looking and also observing things. You have to slow down and look, because if you move too fast, you might scare what you're trying to photograph. And then there are different types of wildlife photography. Well, types, I would say. There's macro, which I am only now starting to, get into. There's underwater, which I have yet to try. I really want to. And birds and other animals. That's what I'm into right now. And I will kind of give an example of macro and the third one. I don't have any underwater pictures to show because I haven't started yet. And then wildlife photography can play a very important role in conservation and environmental awareness. It is important, and I'd even go as far to say it as it being essential to conservation and environmental awareness, because seeing is believing. And we can talk all we like about, environment, environmental issues and, conserving the species and trying to, protect what we have. But when somebody sees a photograph, it touches or changes something in them. So, you can you can talk all you want about, let's say coastal degradation, right? It doesn't really hit home until someone goes to a beach that they've been going to for years, and they may have not gone for a while, and they come back and the whole beach has changed. That kind of strikes a thought that, hey, maybe this is worth protecting because I haven't seen this before. I haven't seen this happen before. I've never this change is so rapid and sudden that I didn't know it was, that important. Or to bring it back to wildlife photography, it can be that a person has no idea the amount of biodiversity that an area may have, you know? And when they see, you can tell them all they like, all you want about the amount of birds and the amount of species we have wherever you are. But it's only when they see what we have and the beauty that's in that environment that they might understand, hey, wow, I didn't know we had this here. Maybe it's worth protecting now, you know? For example, right? I'll bring this up one or two more times. In Grenada, we have a endemic and critically endangered bird, the Grenada dove. It's a national symbol. It's a national bird as well. Most people have never seen one. If you're into birding, you'll know what it sounds like, but you probably have never seen it, right? Recently, I was able to photograph one, and with that, I can help encourage a lot of my friends who may have thought, oh, it doesn't exist. I only heard about this bird, I've never seen it. Why is it important? I can help change their attitudes, which is an important part of conservation. So macro photography. This is an example of a shot I took, um, I want to say about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe. And this was just in my backyard. But macro photography is the art of making small subjects big. It's probably one of the most technically difficult types of photography you can do. And it really does depend on, excuse me, your gear. You need a special lens, you need a flash, and you also need a flash diffuser. And I'll show what the setup looks like further down. And obviously, you have regular wildlife photography, birds. This is a banana quid. This is my front yard. Mona monkey. This was taken in Grenada. Preparation. Now, as a beginner, I did not do much preparation to go out and shoot. It was just, for the love of the game, I would say. You go out and, as I would say, let me see what I could find, see what I could see. But then as you get better, or you get more comfortable with your gear and everything, you start looking for opportunities and certain habitats you would see and think, oh, I think I know what might live here. So you kind of prepare for it, right? Most amazing wildlife photos happen by luck, but luck is when preparation meets opportunity. If you really want to level up your photos, it's important to know your species and its habitat, because knowing your species can allow you to take more interesting shots, right? So most people, when they start out, you want a sharp shot. And if you're doing bird photography, that's what I've started in, so that's what I'm most comfortable speaking about. You would like, bird on a stick. Those are very popular. Nothing wrong with them. You get some beautiful portrait shots of birds on a stick, right? But for instance, the hummingbird. right? I would have I went to a workshop in the country, and while exploring the property, I noticed these banana flowers blooming. And immediately, because I've had experience with that area, I know there are hummingbirds around. So I set up during lunch. I skipped lunch for most of the workshop. Don't do that. I skipped lunch for most of the workshop and brought my tripod, my camera, and I set up in an area where I had a high probability of at least seeing a hummingbird. And I focused on, the banana flower, and I just sat and waited. And knowing their behavior, I knew they would at least come in. It have a few, so I'd have to pick and choose. So I chose the one with the clearest view, and I sat and I waited. And doing that helped me to, again, it helped with composition and light, because composition is one of the key things for wildlife photography. You have to compose your image in a way that your subject is clear, your background isn't too cluttered, and it it's able to portray what you wanted to portray. Sometimes that may not always be possible because you can't control your subject in wildlife photography. And two, it helps you to researching a species and its habitat helps you to prepare for different weather and environmental conditions, right? So say for instance you're going into a swamp area, right? You would want to, well, it may be easy to just go there once with your camera and dawdle around and take a picture once. A great photo would come from scouting the area, looking at where you can set up and how you can set up. And sometimes it might also prepare you for like unexpected rain because you're going into a rainforest or a forest in the mountains. It might look sunny 1 minute and it will rain heavy the next minute. But if you research your habitat, you would know, okay, I can prepare, I can bring an umbrella, I can bring a rain cover for my camera. All of that is very important, you know? And then preparation again entails understanding animal behavior. I was talking about bird on a stick and then I drifted, sorry. Um, right. So bird on a stick is nice, but then behavior is one of the things that makes a wildlife photo stand out, right? So far, before this photo, I was getting hummingbirds, perched, but I knew I wanted to get one in flight, in motion, doing something. So it's like I said, I set up. And because I've seen hummingbirds around before and I take notice of how they behave, I set up on this flower and I just waited. And as soon as one came into the frame, I was focused on the flower. So I was able to focus on the bird really quickly and fire off shots. And the resulting image was this this photo here. But if I didn't set up, I might have been there for longer than an hour trying to, snap a photo of a bird that's small and fast with a camera that's not always able to keep up with the fastest of subjects. So this helps with efficiency and time spent in the field because you take less shots, so you have more space on your SD card, and then you're also not in the environment of the animal for too long, so you're not necessarily disturbing it for very long. You can get your shots and leave because you anticipated the behavior and you got the shot. Another thing about understanding animal behavior, you can observe without taking photos, which kind of helps you, be in the moment more, and you may notice things that you may not notice with a camera because you're trying to get a shot. Um, I have a picture lower down where I can explain something else with this. But yeah, sometimes it's just good to just sit and look and observe your subjects without a camera, because while you have your camera, like I said before, you might be itching to, take a shot and you miss something key about their behavior. Moving on to equipment and technical considerations. This could, to talk about equipment is tricky. It's like people, talking about their mom's cooking and they think, oh, my mother could cook this the best. But then somebody else would think, no, my mother cooks this the best. But the both dishes are great for different reasons. And it's the same with camera gear. There are a plethora of different camera gear that you can use. The most common brands, the big three, I would say, would be Canon, Sony, and Nikon. I currently shoot with Sony. And they both have, the three have their their benefits, but none is top of the line, none beats the other by a very large margin. Lens and lens types can vary very greatly when you talk about wildlife photography. So for reference, right, this lens here is the one that I currently use. It's a 150 to 600 millimeter lens, right? Wildlife photography, most wildlife photographers will tell you that, especially for birds, you would want something that's 400 millimeters and higher. So around 400 to, let's say, 600 millimeters, right? On the long end. So on the longest end of your zoom, the furthest point you can zoom, you want it to be at least 3 to 600 millimeters. However, there are different types of lenses. You have primes, which are lenses that don't zoom, and they can be very sharp, high end, but they're extremely expensive. And then you have your super telephoto lenses that zoom, which is what I have, you know. Now, I would say that the camera body, so this, if you have a DSLR or mirrorless camera, it makes no difference. A DSLR, for those who may not be familiar with camera gear, is a camera. It's a slightly older, not slightly, it's a much older version of interchangeable lens camera that uses a mirror and a pentagram, not pentagram, is it periscope? I think it's a periscope system. So you have a mirror at the base and you can see through a viewfinder up top what you're looking at through the lens. With a mirrorless camera, it's kind of like a television. So you can see what you're looking at, but you can also see the changes you make to your settings in the viewfinder as well. The important thing to note with equipment, right? The camera body is not as important as the lenses. Because I know wildlife photographers who've been winning multiple awards at the highest level, and they still have a DSLR camera, which is a little less advanced than mirrorless. But because they have a great lens, they can take amazing photos. Now, back to prime versus zoom, right? A zoom lens allows you to be more versatile. You can take close-up shots or more wide shots, and it allows you to, have a little bit more room to change your composition or, the way you want to portray a subject or a scene. With prime lenses, you have to get a little bit more creative sometimes. You'll have to physically move to make your subject a bit bigger or smaller in the frame. Now, just to give a little information on price-wise for for lenses, you can pay within, so this lens here, when I would have bought it, it was around, let's say, 800 US, right? For a professional prime lens, you can pay at least, this is probably the cheapest you can go, about, let's say, 6,000 US dollars. I I'm one for my wallets in the future. But yeah, and the lens that I started out with, the 75 300 millimeter lens, that one was, that's probably the cheapest lens, telephoto lens I could have gotten. That one starts at about 300 US. It's not the best. However, I would advise anybody that's starting off, something you can use to learn with and play around with. Now, the camera settings, very important. These settings can dictate whether the image is too dark, too bright, how blurry a background is, and how grainy a photo might look. So shutter speed, right? That is essentially how fast or how long your shutter is exposed, your sensor, sorry, is exposed to the scene. The longer it's exposed, the longer your shutter speed or the slower your shutter speed. So the more light you can get in a scene. However, you may not be able to shoot fast-paced action with a slow shutter speed. You can't, actually. The higher the shutter speed, the less time your sensor is exposed to the scene. So you're taking a little bit, you're taking a little bit less light the faster your shutter speed goes up, but you can freeze more action, right? You can take pictures of fast-paced action animals. ISO. This is a bit tricky to explain. This is technically not necessarily a sensor sensitivity to light, but it the easiest way to explain ISO is like you are you have a radio, right? And you are trying to, hone in on a specific station. It's a sensitivity to a specific station, right? And you increase the sensitivity to increase the let's say the volume of said station. But in increasing the sensitivity, you may not be able to refine what other stations you tune into. So it's the same thing with ISO, where you you increase the sensitivity to light. However, you can't stop or refine the amount of light that might come in artificially, or that it's increasing the light in the photo artificially, technically. So that introduces a lot of grain, and it takes out a lot of detail from your photo. It may make the photo look, give the photo some weird colors or artifacts. However, ISO is not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to know your camera and know how it may deal with certain ISOs. So ISOs are measured in your camera with values of, some ISOs may start at like 64 to let's say 100 and something thousand, right? You just have to know your camera and know how it handles high ISOs or low ISOs. But it allows you to, brighten an image or darken an image after the fact. But in doing so, especially with brightening an image, may introduce a little bit more grain to the photo. Aperture. Aperture, in simple terms, is how blurry your background can look, right? So aperture on a camera is measured in terms of f-stops. You may hear this word thrown around in the photography world, f-stops. And the lower your f-stop, The lower the number is, the more blurry your background would be. The higher the number, the less blurry your background would be. So you'd get a little bit more of your background in focus. Um, given, well, it's also has to do with light as well, right? In macro photography, the aperture is very important because it allows you to change your depth of field, which is another word for, how blurry your background looks. And in macro photography, you have to use a rather high aperture number, which can, reduce the amount of light you have. Hence, you need a flash for macro photography. That's you need a flash because at high aperture numbers, you don't have as much light, and your ISO can skyrocket, and you lose detail and all of that sort of stuff. Let's move on. Right. This is a macro photography setup. You have a basic camera, right? This black thing with the white attachment on top, this is a flash diffuser. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I have something similar to this for macro photography. And then you have a macro lens. Now, a macro lens is different from a regular lens because it has a level of magnification. So you can you can turn on your magnification, and you can essentially take pictures of small subjects, and they will appear, a lot bigger on your sensor, so that, you get more detail and clarity on your subject, right? But for that, you need a flash. So you would place your flash on top of your camera, put on your diffuser, and take a picture. You need a diffuser as well because with flash and macro photography, you want soft light. That's something I forgot to mention. A lot of photographers in general, not just wildlife, they like soft diffuse light because it reduces the amount of shadows that you get. So you get a cleaner looking image. And for macro photography, you want I want to say flat light, but you want a clean light. No, you don't want too much white or bright spots or too much dark or shadowy spots. So that's why you have to use a diffuser for macro. I put in an underwater setup because I think, it's important to at least show it, even though I don't currently do underwater photography. I have done a little bit of research. So this is a underwater photography housing. They sometimes make them specific to your camera. And what would happen is you would put your camera in this, and then most times you would pump out the air in the housing so that it creates a seal so that no water can enter the housing and, destroy your camera. And they have all these buttons on the outside so you can operate your camera, and a handle on this side. And I think this button here operates your shutter button for the most part. So this is underwater housing, which is key for underwater photography. You can't go underwater with your camera just like, well, I wouldn't. There are some camera brands that may not be able to survive going underwater, but they're very resilient in terms of getting wet from snow, rain, or falling in a river. Yeah. Moving on. Some tips and tricks, or I guess just advice, if you want to call it that. Get low or get to eye level of your subject. That is one of the most important rules or tricks or tips if you want to say of wildlife photography. Getting low to the ground, if your subject is low to the ground, or getting eye level with them, gives a photo a different feel. It gives your viewer um, the ability to connect eye to eye with your subject. So any wildlife photographer you would speak to would want you to get as low as possible to the ground to get, eye level with certain animals, or, try to get an eye level shot. It also helps with composition because the lower you are to the ground, the less clutter you may have. So if you take a photo, let's say top down, you're gonna get some of the ground in the photo if your subject is on the ground. If you get low enough, you'll get a clear view past your subject in the background. So you have a cleaner background, which makes for a more appealing photo most of the time. So getting lower eye level with your subject is very important. Secondly, you want to capture behavior. Like I said earlier, bird on a stick is beautiful, it's fine, but there's just something about capturing an animal doing something or capturing behavior that just catches your attention and holds it. And then another composition tip, I mean, this is a rule, but it can be broken for creative liberty, right? Make sure the light is behind your back. So if the sunlight is to your back, that means the sunlight is on whatever you're photographing, which gives you more than enough light to 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 get nice details on your subject. And then if there's action happening, you have more than enough light to raise your shutter speed and take sharp photos without raising your ISO, which would, destroy some of the detail that you have, right? Another tip on light that I didn't put here, unfortunately. Um, Shooting in the morning, like early morning and late evening, in what we would call golden hour, that has the best type of light, that golden soft light, that can make a photo so beautiful. I mean, it might be difficult to wake up that early, or some areas in mountainous places, especially here, I would say, because there's a mountain ridge running from north to south, from south to north in Grenada, makes it difficult sometimes to get that nice soft morning light all the time, or evening light, because by the time the sun rises over the mountain, you lose a bit of that soft light and it becomes a little harsher. And with harsh light, so from, let's say, well, it depends on where you live. I would say in Grenada from about, let's say, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., when the sun is harsh, it's high in the sky, it washes out some color. So you don't get as much of a punch in your photos, right? Now let's move to pre-focus. By pre-focus, I mean focus on an area. So if you're taking action shots, right? Sometimes, the gear you have may not be able to keep up with certain fast-paced animals. What you can do is you can, again, this ties back into researching your habitat and your subject. So you can focus on an area that you know that your subject will pass through or be near. And by doing that, you can kind of kickstart your lens and your camera into jumping quickly on your subject so that it doesn't have to take as long to focus, which gives you a better chance of nailing the shot. Because if you start from, let's say, the beginning of your focus range on your camera, it's really blurry, depending on how far your subject is. Most times it's going to be a good distance, right? So you want to focus somewhere near to where you know your subject is going to pass, or you estimate, you guess your subject is going to pass. And when it does pass, you engage your focus, your autofocus, and you can track said subject through that area, and it should jump on but it will give you a better chance than just, starting from the beginning and trying to zoom forward to the end. It takes some time, and not all lenses and cameras have that instant jump, you know? So and even if you do have that instant jump, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always happen. So it's a good thing to pre-focus on where you think you might get a pass through of your subject, and it'll, help you nail certain shots, especially birds in flight. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but manage your shutter speed, right? You want to manage and pay attention to your shutter speed, because sometimes you may lower your shutter speed before, and for whatever reason, you lower your shutter speed, and then, you may get some better light, and then action starts, and you fire off some shots, and realize, oh no, these are not sharp. Why? And you check your shutter speed, and it's too low. So I could also say to this, check your settings regularly as well. Because even me, who some people may call a professional, I forget to change certain settings. I'll be shooting macro one day, and I change my lens and I go out, and I forget to change my shutter speed, and I miss a moment, a great moment, because I didn't look or remember to check my settings and change them, And another big one, which is a little bit controversial to some people, but learn to edit your photos, right? Because that can help you to bring out some of the latent beauty in a scene. And I know some people may have the concerns about, leaving a photo in its natural state, to depict what was actually there. I'm not saying drastically change anything, but it's up to you and your artistic vision. I personally don't like to edit or change too much. I not I rarely remove like branches and stuff from my my photos. However, learning to edit can help somebody to connect with the way you saw the photo, So you can see a scene with your eyes, but then you take the photo and it doesn't exactly look like you thought it looked or how it made you feel. But when you edit it, you can bring out the beauty that you felt in that moment through the edit. So I say it's important. And it can also help you to fix some of the mistakes you might have made in terms of settings. So you might have made a photo too bright for whatever reason, with your shutter speed being too low or your exposure not being set correctly. You can go in to an editing software, you can lower it and brighten it or darken it. You can fix some slight mistakes through editing, right? And lastly, something that a lot of beginners do, even pros do this too, leave some room in the frame. Don't overcrop an image too much, just to make the subject big in the frame, right? Something that I still have to get used to is having my subject small in the frame and showcasing some of the environment. It feels like it's defeating the purpose of wildlife photography sometimes, where you have a small subject in the frame. But truthfully, it can help with context, because the subject is there, but it gives the composition a story. Sometimes, you have this bird and open ocean or mountains behind it, and it gives a sense of place or habitat. And that can add so much to a photograph, you know? So don't overcrop too much. Don't crop too tight. Leave some space in the frame for your subject to breathe. Another thing with this too is that when you're taking bird in flight photos, right, you may want to crop in on your subject, make it bigger in the frame to enhance detail. However, you want to leave some room in the frame for your subject to fly into, so it looks a little bit more natural It doesn't look like, oh, it's just a bird flying. No, you have some space for your subject to fly into, and it just makes the photo a little bit more balanced, you know? So that's another important thing. I have some examples, right? So these photos were taken on the same day. I think it's the same subject. There were two of these birds on the picture. I can't remember. But this photo here, cropped in, so a good photo. It has its merits, right? But this photo gives you a little bit more of the scene. You can tell, okay, looks like there's a beach, there's some seaweed or some grass or something behind it. And then there's a change in the background a little bit. So maybe it's rocks in the background. You know, it gives you a sense of place, while this photo here gives the bird is very big in the frame itself, but it doesn't necessarily give you a sense of place, you know? This one as well. Photo, bird has a fish in its mouth, but doesn't tell you where this is, what the bird is doing in terms of did it walk out with the fish? Did it just catch the fish? Did it steal the fish? But here you can tell, okay, this looks like a kind of swamp area. You can see the bird in the water, the grass. You can see the fish in its mouth, and you can see the water droplets, which gives you a context that, oh, bird just caught the fish, right? But full transparency, this photo was not taken in a swamp. This photo was taken in a drain behind a supermarket. So again, importance of, going out and finding things to shoot, because wildlife is all around and it can be in surprising places. And those places can be where you get your best photos. These two photos as well were taken on the same day. Now let's get into some of the ethics and Lord, sorry for the typo. Some of the ethics with and conservation with wildlife photography, right? You want to respect animals' space and habitat. By that, I mean you don't want to get too close. Certain animals have a range of comfort with humans that you can get close enough but not too close, and it differs by species. So going back to this, right? This bird did not care that I was as close as I was, and it continued fishing and doing what it did for, I actually left it there, which is the best thing you can do. You can take your photo and leave without disturbing the animal. You want to go in and out without the animal noticing you're there, because that might change its perception of the habitat. Respecting the animal's habitat. You don't want to go there and make too much noise or litter. You want to go there and leave it as you left it. Leave it as you met it, sorry. And refrain from baiting certain animals and using playback calls. Now, it depends. I would say it depends on the species, because certain animals can get habituated from being fed, and they become dependent on you feeding them. And doing that just for a photo that you'll take and leave and sometimes never come back to the area is not ethical, because animal can become dependent and then depend on humans for food. And that can lead to, depending on the animal, so like mammals like bears and stuff, that can lead to attacks, crocodiles as well, alligators. And that can lead to attacks. I can also, because they're dependent on humans, if they don't get human, I guess, they don't get food from humans, they may die because they decided they're not hunting, they're waiting for somebody to come by and feed them. And the issue with playback calls is that at certain times of year, certain animals may be missing, and using playback calls can confuse them, which can throw off certain cycles and breeding cycles, mismatches. It can cause a level of confusion in animals that you don't want to do. Because some animals are endangered, some species that you want to photograph are endangered, and that kind of mismatch can be detrimental to a species, right? Now, for conservation, photographs can be used to engage the public and aid in conservation campaigns. Like I said with the Grenada dove, right? You, I've worked with an NGO, and because of that, I was able to get these pictures, and they can use the pictures to inform others that may not have believed that, hey, we have footage of the dove, we have evidence, you know, because again, seeing is believing. And then it can help with learning about species behavior because you have a picture or a video of a species doing something, and that allows you to observe from a distance, of course, because you're not necessarily in situ or in the habitat of the animal. So you can take your video, leave, and look back at it and break it down, which helps with conservation because you're able to see what it's doing. You can look at social cues if it's interacting with other animals or how it interacts with the environment. And then lastly, consider the locations of endangered species, right? You don't want to go to a location, take a photo, and then expose that location, right? Not even just endangered species, I would say. I would say species that are sensitive to human presence. So things like owls, you don't want to just expose an owl nest because they are sensitive to human presence and they may just abandon the nest. So something that you can do, right? You can take your photo, but if you post it, you post no location data. You don't tell anybody where it is for the sake of the animal. Because in certain areas, you post the location data, and there are people who don't care that, you know, that they're going to be disturbing a sensitive animal or an endangered species. They will go and they will harass it just for a photo. And that's not what we want to promote. The other thing is you can take your photo, but then wait to post it or, you know, share it after a couple months when you're sure the animal may have left the area if it's migratory, or when you're sure that, you know, it's probably not there anymore. So that's another thing you can do in terms of ethical consideration when working with species. Opportunities in wildlife photography, right? You can share your work through social media and exhibitions, which can open up future publicity. So for me, I have done exhibitions with the Grenada Arts Council for about 3 years now, I think, 2 or 3 years. And that gives you an avenue to, you know, put yourself out there, network. You can sell your photos. And it also aids with conservation as well, which is the most important part of why I sometimes do wildlife photography. It's important to build a portfolio, right? Because that preps you for some of the opportunity that may come your way. It allows you to have a set amount or a set. This allows you to have how would I put this? What's the word I want to use? It gives you the ability to have your best photos in one place that you can quickly access or share with somebody that may be looking for, you know, to buy a photo or to use one of your prints or your photos for, you know, publications or something. You know, it's important to build a portfolio so that you can pull it out quickly and say, hey, I have this, I can send it over to you. Or, you know, you can look through this here and see what you like. For instance, I was at a local hotel had reached out to me wanting to use some of my pictures. And because I was building my portfolio, I knew exactly where to look for them, how to find them, what quality. And they were looking for specific birds to put in certain rooms. And with the portfolio I had, I knew, okay, I have this species, I have this species doing this. I know the quality of some of the photos I have that I can send over. So I was able to quickly pull out what I have that they wanted and send it for them so they can choose which ones they felt like they wanted, right? That's important. That's why it's important to build a portfolio and collaborating with conservation organizations, right? As I mentioned, this photo here is of the Grenada dove. This was taken while working with a local NGO. And in doing so, I was able to, you know, get footage for myself and have footage for them to be able to share for the cause, right? But it's not just local organizations you may be able to work with. You become, a good enough photographer and you may be able to work. Some international or regional agencies may reach out to you, either asking you to work on a project with them or even, use some of your pictures for promotional ideas or scientific research stuff, you know. There's a photographer that I've seen, and he's gotten good enough that Nat Geo is using him right now to do um I think it's a series on Asiatic lions in India, so there's a lot of opportunity in wildlife photography. It's a competitive field, but I'd say just keep going, keep pushing, and you'll end up somewhere. You'll end up in good places, I would say. Because even with I forgot to put this in, but another opportunity would be entering competitions. Because with the Epic Seas and Scenes competition, given that I won an award, one of my photos was incorporated in a calendar, so that gives me a lot more visibility. People would see my photo, they would see my name below the photo, and that gives, a sense of publicity and exposure. So that's another opportunity. But also some competitions give you monetary prizes or trips, which can allow you to, broaden your horizons, shoot species you've never seen before, or invest in yourself. And then they still use your picture for future promotional adverts or conservation posts, depending on the organization that you submitted the photo to for the competition. So all of that is possible with wildlife photography, you know? And that's just the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, but thank you for joining and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Griffin, for the insightful and inspiring presentation. I'm sure many of us have gained greater appreciation for wildlife photography and its important role in conservation. Thank you for the applause. You deserve all of them. Now we're going to have a small session to discuss and give the platform to our participants. For any questions you have towards Mr. Griffin in terms of wildlife photography or just questions you feel like you'll be able to answer.
Hi, good night, Mr. Griffith. Can you hear me?
Hi, good idea. Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm Stefan from Guyana. I was very interested to hear how you started and then transitioned into the expensive camera. I've been looking at cameras and I know for sure that it can get really expensive. So, in the meantime that you're gearing towards that expensive life as someone with just a phone, what tips would you help to translate uh, that you use there for that camera for the expensive camera? How can you translate that knowledge into the practical use of just a smartphone for wildlife photography?
Smartphone. I'll be fully transparent. You may not get the same quality, but it's possible. There may be some accessories you can get for a smartphone that may not be as expensive as getting a full-blown camera. So you can get certain scopes that you can put onto the lens of your camera so you can get the length or the zoom, you would say. Um, but again, I would say especially if you have bigger subjects. So I know in Guyana you may have more mammals than here in Grenada. You want to get eye level with them. You may not be able to get as close as you want with a phone, but try to get eye level. That's important, I would say. And with a phone, I would say try to get more environmental shots, some more wide shots, shots that um give off or not give off, but show the habitat, because that's very important. While some people may focus on getting close to the subject and making the subject big in the frame, it's slept on to, show some of the environmental shots. Those shots can be very good too, you know. I know it's hard. Wildlife photography is very hard to do with a phone, but it's not impossible. You have to temper some expectation in terms of quality and how close you want to get, but you can get some decent shots, especially if you get a scope. You do some research on some of the scopes to put on your camera lenses, and I've seen some that work very well. I would say you may not rival getting a camera, but you can get some good shots. I hope that was a sufficient answer.
Yes, thank you very much, especially the part about scopes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, we have a few questions in the chat. Let this be. One is from Vivian. What's your favorite species to shoot in pictures? She needs.
Um, that's a that's a loaded question, Vivian. Um, I don't think I can choose. I started off with birds, so I love my hummingbirds, I love my seabirds, and I love my raptors. I love my migratory species, my shorebirds. But I've been falling in love with mackerel. So that's insects and frogs. So, but I'll give you a species that I really want to shoot. Um, I want to shoot leopards, so more mammalian predators. That's something I really want to do. Go to Africa and shoot lions, leopards, cheetahs. Yeah, that's where my I want to say my heart, but that's something that's really high on the bucket list for me.
Well, I think we all agree. We hope you get there, and we're excited to see your photos. We're coming to the end of today's session, so we're gonna ask one more question from the chat, and that is from Kelsey. And she says, what competitions do you think they can participate in terms of our audience?
Um, Honestly, if you have a camera, well, certain competitions take phone entries, right? They take phone shots. I can't think of any that do off the top of my head at the moment, but I would say enter anything you can enter because um while I may have um I guess you could say it's professional gear, I've seen people win awards with things like GoPros, and it's not necessarily about the camera, but how you use it. And once you know you spend time with your camera and you understand the settings, you can take phenomenal photos with anything you have, right? So I would say enter any competition you can, because you might learn from looking at the entries that may have won. Some competitions give you the opportunity to see other people's entries, so you can look at those as well. But don't let the scale of the competition stop you from entering. Because if I looked at Wildlife Photographer of the Year and said, oh no, I'm not ready for that, and I didn't enter my photo, I would have missed out on the experience of being in the final of the judging process, right? Which is a big thing in itself to me. So I would say don't let the scale of the competition stop you from joining, because you might be surprised that your photo touches one of the judges in a way that they can't stop thinking about, and you make it to winning an award globally. So join anything you can join. once your photo is, part of the theme that some competitions might have, or it's, ethically sound, it's not, doctored too much or against the competition rules, I would say enter. You never know what might happen.
That is quite inspiring. Thank you once again, Dr. Griffin, for sharing your knowledge, experiences, and passion for wildlife photography. Your presentation was phenomenal. It showed us the technical side of photography and also how it can contribute to biodiversity, conservation, and environmental education. I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us this evening, and we truly appreciate your participation. But before you go, I'm going to invite the steering committee to make some announcements and a few closing remarks.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamika. I am the Vice Chairperson for Events and Skills Training. I would just like to say as well, thank you to John for coming out. I'm really, really happy with the information that you shared, and I'm pretty sure that the tips and the experience shared will help at least one person within this forum. Hopefully, all of us will be willing to take the reins on this. Um, Before I pass on to any of the other steering committee members here, we'd just like to share a little challenge for you guys here. This wasn't just a opportunity for John to share his experience and his work, but within these capacity building sessions, we also want you to take some of these skills and apply them within your professional life or your recreational life, however you would like to use them. So using what he shared tonight, we would like you to go ahead. If you have a camera or phone, we would like you to go ahead and use some of these tips and take any pictures, immerse yourself in nature, observe wildlife ethically as you shared. But you can take these pictures and you can post them on your story or your feed using the hashtags biodiversity in focus, GYBN Wildlands, and Youth for Nature. And you can post them on either Instagram, X, or which was formerly Twitter, LinkedIn, on Facebook, and you can tag us and we will reshare because we want to at least put eyes on the work that you guys also take part in. And we want to make sure that these are skills that are sustainable for you to apply in the future. Maybe some of you might like to continue doing this just for fun or take it seriously as a profession like John. So yeah, please, I implore you all to take a chance. You never know where it might lead you, as he mentioned earlier. And you can also follow us on social media if you don't take part in the challenge at GYBN Caribbean. That's our tag across all social media networks. And as previously mentioned, we're available on Instagram, Facebook, X/Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you are not a part of the GYBN Caribbean chapter as yet, please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen, and it will take you to our registration form. Again, we will all like to see you actively participate within the Caribbean and actually, put a voice forward for the youth and advocate for us in the conservation world. So yes, I'll now pass on to thank you again. Sorry for coming out tonight and supporting us. And I will pass on to any other member that's on here. I think Zadie was here earlier and Tyrell. So you guys can go ahead and then we'll close out.
Good night, everyone. I'm gonna make my remarks very brief. I'm very proud and happy to see the great work that the events committee has done. I know John is a boss at what he does in terms of photography, so I'm very happy that he took the time to share his skills with us this afternoon. We really, really want to encourage everyone to sign up and be a part of GYBN Caribbean. So if you haven't as well, done that as well, sorry, please be sure to fill out the registration form and join because there's a lot more exciting stuff coming up. So yes, thank you very much, Tamika, and congrats again to the events committee.
Well, thank you to our steering committee and a big thank you to Mr. Griffith for his presentation today. If you enjoyed today's session, we encourage you to stay connected with the GYBN Caribbean for future capacity building activities such as this one. On behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network Caribbean chapter, thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful evening. Stay safe and we hope to see you in our next event.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming again.
Good night, John. Wonderful job.
Thanks, Mommy.